What are they? How do they benefit us? Which ones are out there? And we'll talk about the things that we've tried so far, which I can't say it's a ton, but it's enough to get a good grasp on what to look for.
Were you actually taking it, or were you trying to feed me
I
lines?
figured while you were doing that, I'd just do one, and you could either you can do one or the other, or you could
Okay.
just get rid of them both and just go 8, and that'd be 8 episodes,
Episode 8.
and that's it. That's don't say anything else. To
Uh,
sim, oh, not to sim. That is the question. What
ooh,
is nobler in the mind of the sky?
Welcome back to the Aviation RC Noob Podcast. You found us. My name is Joe.
And I'm Matt.
We're here to be with you along your journey and to share our experiences in RC aviation. If you have any questions, thoughts, or want to share a flight story, hit us up at aviationrcnoob@gmail.com. Now, buckle in. Let's take off. Here we are, Matthew, with episode 8. I believe this time we're talking about simulators, correct?
Yep, simulators. We made it. I don't know. It made it sound like there's a long path to get there. No, simulators. We're here. Yeah, let's talk about them.
Okay, well, before we get into simulators, per our norm, let's talk about what we've been doing in the last 2 weeks since we had recorded.
Okay, great. Do you want to start? I know you've had a pretty busy go. I know mine was interesting, but I feel like it's old hat compared to where you're at. And it's up to you. Do you want me to start?
Why don't you go ahead and just because you're also first in the notes, and then I'll go. Real quick, did we flew together before last episode? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Right. Last episode, I was working on the Spitfire. I was most of the way through. I basically was chugging through a kit awful quick, and it was right before my kids were coming back for the summer, and of course school's starting. It's that time of year, and so we are trying to figure all that out. And that's kind of where we left off. And you had flown your Simple Soar, and I think something. You were able to fly it for a little while, but something went wrong and you had to repair it.
That's
I
right.
think you were either that or you were still on the repair time from when we simmed together. Or not simmed, when we flew together. You had busted the pod. But I'm pretty sure you went out pretty quickly. You went out like the next week and flew. And I think that something happened and you just had to fix it. I think the servo went and you had to fix it.
Mm-hmm. So why don't we start with yours and then we'll get into mine.
Okay. Great. Well, mine's relatively easy. I'd finished the Spitfire and I went out to give it a maiden. I wanted to, um, I wanted to do it before the kids came back because that tends to be the time where I can just go and be footloose and fancy free. I don't have to worry if the kids are, I don't know, being too loud for people who are flying or whatnot. So I went out ahead of time before they showed up, and I was in the middle of cleaning my house like a whirlwind, and I went out really quick. With that, I did the main flight, put the throttle up to 3/4, checked my crap, which I think is an official term. It's basically just making sure the ailerons are going the right way, the elevator up is up and down is down. I think flight test calls it the high five method, where when you pull back the stick, it the surface comes up to match it, basically, except for the rudder. So I checked that. I put up the 3/4 throttle, and I let it go. It was flying on a 1300 milliamp hour 4-cell battery on the flight test radial engine with a 9x6 E prop from APC. I can't remember what manufacturer. They're called APC. I know that stands for something, and I can't remember what it is. But anyway, that's what I was flying, and those are the components. I was using regular, blue 9-gram servos, nothing fancy there. And I'll tell you what, it went right out of my hands, and I think it went real low for a second. I was able to get back on the sticks with enough time to kind of pull it up out from hitting the ground. But once I had done that and I did a couple clicks of trim, it really didn't need a whole ton. But once in short order, I trimmed it out. I'll tell you what, I flew it around for the next 5.5 or 8 minutes or something like that. And it was just, I know that's a big difference, but I can't remember because I flew it a couple times.
Mm-hmm.
One time was short, one time felt pretty long. And oh man, it flew like a kitten. It was great. And it flew at about 30% throttle. You could kick it way back, and it just kind of putted across the sky, and it was real gentle on the sticks. Like you kind of had to use some serious throws to kind of get it to go places. And of course, because it's not going very fast, which is great. So, but because it's 4S and it's on a pretty good motor and a great biting prop. When I started bringing it up I brought it so that about 60% throttle would be a good flying speed, and I trimmed it out there. But I'll tell you what, when I cranked it up to full, that thing, I was doing acrobatic S's through the sky, really tight loops. I mean, we're talking really tight loops. And I ended up going back out with my kids about a week later with 2200 3-cell batteries, just basically a little bit less power, and it still performed pretty much the same. It was real gentle on the sticks. It got really tight turns when I was going fast. One of the guys was saying, he's like, "Man, you should. Are those high throws?" And I told him, I said, "No, I mean I have a rate set for 100, 70, and 50. So that's like a high, medium, and low rate. So basically reduces the total throws." As I want, and that way I can select it depending on either the speed I'm going or the plane I'm flying. It's pretty versatile. So I took that. I told him, I said, "Oh man, I'm on my low throws, so that's like 50% of the throws I could have." And I said, "I think that's pretty much where it's supposed to be." And he goes, "Yeah, you might want to tone that down even more, man, especially with this plane, because that was kicking around, man. I'm surprised the wings didn't fall." I said, "Me too." I mean, it snapped left and right. Now I've got a video on my YouTube, so if anybody wanted to check it out, they can. But it was neat. It was just real fun to have it just putter across the sky and take it easy, and you could relax. And I mean, what a great trainer, because it was responsive, yet it didn't have to be crazy. But if you wanted it to be, it could be fast, it could be agile. You could try all the maneuvers you wanted to. It's a fighter plane, and it shows. But Flight Test did a really good job at making its slower speed tendencies real gentle. And this is the original Spitfire. This is not the Master Series. While I'm certain to be making that soon, I wanted to see what the differences were. And if you have an interest in flight test planes and you haven't built this and you're relatively new to flying, I hesitated to build it because I thought it's a warbird. Everybody says warbirds are really dangerous because, again, they're agile. They're warbirds. They're designed for acrobatics and for dogfighting and things like that. So this is worth it. This is worth it. Go build it. You won't regret it. You will be very happy about it.
Now, if I'm remembering the design of that plane correctly, because I looked up the build video on it, and one of the things they commented on was that particular wing style for that plane had real bad drop tendencies on the wings as it got to lower speeds. But if I'm remembering the build correctly, that it was a regular wing out to the last little bit, at which point, say the underside of the wing went away and it turned into a heavy undercamber at the wingtips. Am I remembering that plane correctly?
Exactly. It's elliptical in shape still, just like so your plan form and the silhouette you're going to see in the sky is just like a Spitfire, just like every Spitfire you've ever seen. However, the giant undercamber, and it's a pretty good portion of the wing is undercambered, much like the very slow, easy, gentle flyers have. Um, yeah, so they left that part open because because of that. It really helps out with the tip stall tendencies. And a tip stall is basically saying that when it starts to stall, the end of the wing stalls first, which means as it's going down, rather than have the whole plane kind of slow and then drop down to gain some speed, it will have one wing or the other stall first, in which case then you're going to have like a rolling action with that dip. And of course, because it's stalling, there's almost no control. So it's, for a pilot who's not ready for it, especially if you're not high enough to recover,
Hmm.
it's really dangerous. So, as a beginning plane, you want to get rid of that. I think the only thing I did to modify that plane was I put a barbecue skewer in the groove, in one of the grooves for the top bend of the wing to extend all the way out to the wingtip. Because I know me, and I know that sometimes when I land, I don't land level and I catch a wingtip and it starts to cartwheel. And I also know that on the undercamber parts, at least the planes I've built, and oftentimes when I do that, I'm doing kind of a rolled wing and it's not this kind of cut groove, kind of faceted style. And because I do it that way, I'm pulling the paper off the underside of the wing, which makes it a lot weaker structurally. And so that kind of cartwheel will destroy the wings that I build when I'm doing it that way. Flight Test leaves the paper on, so that's a lot stiffer. But I just wanted to be sure because it looked like a great plane. It's a beautiful plane, and everybody said it would fly great. So if it lived up to its hype, which it did, um, I'm gonna love that. And that's one of those things. Like I didn't want to go out to the field and do something dumb, have a cartwheel, and go, oh well, I guess that goes there. There goes a plane. And by putting the barbecue skewer in there, I've helped assure it's going to take a more serious crash than a typical cartwheel to make it unflyable.
Well, good.
I also dusted off the Vigan in that second group of going out with a Spitfire. I have a Vigan from a long time ago. I busted the nose, and David Vindenstall, who designed that plane, designed it with a whole nose section that you could replace. And as a matter of fact, when they were putting it out, they would sell kits of just the nose section. So, so what I did is I ended up making a handful of those because if you're going to nose it in, it's going to nose in, and you're going to just toss the front end, but the rest of the plane will be fine. You put a new nose on, and away you go. Um, so, so I put a new nose on finally, cut one out and did that, and then I started flying it around. Now it has a 64 millimeter EDF, which is the lower recommended power group on it. It's I think 5 blades or 6 blades. I don't remember the motor specs, but that's not super important. I used a 3-cell 2200 because I knew it balanced really well with the 2200 right at the front, right before where the nose section gets taped on or gets attached. And so I put up the full throttle and threw it, and I'll tell you what, it it was like the X-29, except it had just enough to actually start gaining some altitude. And I had to kind of level it out so it gets a little bit more speed. And then, of course, it would start to like sink back down. So I'd kind of almost have to like bring it up and then bring it down to like get some speed and then bring it up a little bit more and then start to slowly gain altitude. And I had to really baby it up into the sky. But it flew like it had before, which that plane is on its slow end is a really good. It's a great beginner EDF. And I think if I had a 4-cell available and I'd flown it on a 4-cell, that thing would have rocked around the sky and been a lot of fun. Um, so that's another one of those planes where, like, if that's something that interests you, go build it. That's the one to build. I mean, you can build a lot of others, and they'll probably be fun. But that one will help you get your feet wet without. It's designed to be forgiving in a crash in that it's easy to repair and put back up. The EDF is enclosed in the fuse, so it's very unlikely to get damaged unless you belly land it hard. And even then, still probably not. It's I think the only thing I've done to that is I put a wooden stick. I happen to have like small wooden sticks we're making kites out of, and I just kind of embedded it into the wing because the wing is purely a single foam plate. That's it. And so to me, I'm like, that's not going to last if I don't support it.
Yeah.
So basically, I cut out a little section to put the thing in. I glued it in, and now it's like extra strong. So I think if I had brought a 4 cell, I really would have enjoyed the Vigan. But it was nice to see it back in the air and have it ready for flying. And then there's two more things, kind of with the simming. I have my boys are back, and I keep talking to them. I said, we have a couple kits, like if you want to get going. But I said, I'd like you to spend a little bit of time. You spend all this time video gaming. Take a little bit of time with the sim and get used to correcting a plane flying through the sky with the sim and see if you can fly it. And then if you're doing pretty well with that, see if you can land it on a pretty consistent basis. And my oldest has already caught on pretty well. Not surprised. Young kids pick up on things pretty quick. My youngest still likes to just take off just so he can crash into the ground. So he's
Be a
not
little
going to
while
get
on him yet.
before he gets on the actual sticks out in the field. But I'm not surprised. But he's having a fun time with it. He's like, hey, check it out, and he's like, "Rrr," and it takes off. He's like, check it out, Dad, "Rrr," and he rolls it and tanks it right in. And
Look
I'm
at
like,
how straight down I can get it before it hits the ground.
I know. Like, are you having fun? He's like, yeah. I'm like, all right. Well, if we ever go out to the field, you're not touching my planes yet. He's like, whatever. He's like, well, I wouldn't do that to your planes, Dad. And I'm like, yeah, I'll believe it when I see it. But I'm glad you're getting interested in it. And he said, yeah. So that's pretty good. I'm excited about that. I'm very excited because I can't wait for us to all go out to the field, each with a little something to fly around and have fun with, and just kind of cheer each other on and support each other as we go. And speaking of that, we have a channel in our Discord chat where we kind of put a really small community so far. And we had a handful of people kind of put together like a build party. Kind of like when Joe and I get together, we kind of just say, hey, we're thinking about building tonight. If anybody's on, just reach out, and then we'll see if we can get you in like a video chat, and we'll just all just build and chat about planes or whatever else. And so we were kind of doing the same thing that night with, I know, Joe, you were trying to get on. I think you had big internet issues. I think we had a couple other guys. I'll call the usual culprits. And then we had a guy from Israel. And that was a real treat. So he works like an overnight job. So he was at the end of his day at 8 in the morning, his time. It was like 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock my time. It was 11 o'clock where these other guys were on the west coast of America. Joe and I are on the east coast. And so he was just kind of sitting at the field. He's like, I'm here. And I saw you guys called in. Like, let me see if I could call back. And so he got on the chat, and we just started talking for a little bit. And then we're like, dude, are you at the flying field? He's like, yeah. I was thinking about flying. I'm like, well, what the heck are you waiting for, man? Get your plane out. Let's watch you fly. This is gonna be great because we're looking like it's the middle of the night. It's late. We're not gonna fly anything. We're not gonna fly until tomorrow. We're still working on the planes we want to do that with. And he's like, are you sure? I'm like, and we're all like with a resounding heck yeah. Like, what are you thinking? And so he pulled out his planes and he threw them in the air. He had like an Edge 450 or Edge 540, whatever the FT Edge. He had a Bloody Baron, and he had a couple other things. I can't really remember, but anyway, he had a handful of planes. He got them all together, and he just flew them around. He flew great. He didn't crash one of them, which we were pretty amazed with. He was more amazed than we were. He did it great, and he was telling us, he's like, you know what, I was really bummed because like, I'm out at the field and like I was supposed to meet up with somebody and they bailed on me. And that really sucks because I was excited about that. And then here it turns out there's these people practically on the other side of the world who can sit here with me and my phone, and we can chat and fly together as if we're hanging out at the field. We're ragging on them and like, come on, go lower, that kind of stuff, and
Right.
it was just fun. We just had a real good time. So if you ever have a handful of people that might be totally different spots in the world, um, but they might be flying or something, or you're about to go to the field, you just say, "Hey, man, I'm about to go fly something. If you want me to, I could put my phone out and you could join me." And if they're up for it, like it'll be a lot more fun than you think.
Well, good. I'm glad you guys had a good time with it. I hate that I couldn't get a stable connection that night, but the next day I went
Oh
and
man,
bought a new router, so I'm
yeah,
good now.
I remember. Yeah, and I'm glad. I'm really sad that you couldn't join us because that would have been even more fun for sure. Although you would have been up till the wee hours of the morning. It was probably somewhere around 3 o'clock my time
Ugh.
when we were kind of all finished. But I don't know. As tough as that might have been the next day, it was worth it. It was a good time.
Well, good.
But you, Joe, you finally got you took that servo out, right?
Right.
You're saying
So
that you had troubles with your servo.
right. So as I recall, the last thing we talked about on the last episode, as far as my glider went, was that you and I had gone and had a nice day flying, and had made my simple sore, and had some mild success with it, even though it tanked and ultimately ended up, in the dirt. Um, so I rebuilt the power pod and made the power pod longer so that we didn't have to do the rubber banding of an extra battery on the front,
Mm-hmm.
because that rubber band ultimately guillotined the power pod, which is fine, happens. Uh,
Well, and you know what? Part of that was because I double twisted the rubber band around.
yeah, and
I pulled it real tight.
it's no big deal. To get the balance of the plane right, anyway, I need to build an extended power pod without that.
Mm-hmm.
That way, I wouldn't have double battery mass on
Yep.
there. So rebuilt the power pod, made it longer, got the CG right, and took it out. That was the following Saturday. So actually, the day that our last episode released was the day that I was out there putting a
Mm-hmm.
second flight on the Simple Soar,
Yeah.
and I got some good flight time out of it. It took off, it flew. It wasn't giving me some of the same problems that I was having with the first flight. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and what I found out since then, and I've talked to you about it, is I was flying that Simple Soar on the same profile that I had set up for the old Fogey, which is fine.
Right.
The servos were still moving in the correct directions. They were all, what I wanted. The
Mm-hmm.
throws were about what I
Right.
needed. Everything was good.
And they're both 3-channel planes too, so the functions should be almost identical.
Right. Everything was fine, except that when I went out the second time, I realized when I looked down at the controller, I said, "Oh, I had centered all my control surfaces as close as I could get them when it was sitting on the bench, what I thought was center." But the moment I turned the transmitter on, I looked down. Oh, look at that! I've still got fogey trims in here where it was rudder way to the left and a bit of
Oh
aileron up. And I'm
no.
like, oh man, no, or elevator up.
Uh-oh.
So centered those out before I launched it, and it it was an interesting flight. Um, we had some. We may have had a storm that morning. I ended up having a storm as I was on the drive back home, and it was a nice hot day, and there were what I can only assume to be substantial updrafts, which would be great for gliding. But there also seemed to be some substantial downdrafts. So,
Well, with one comes the other, right?
yeah, I just didn't expect them to be like the columns to be immediately side by side of each other. such that I got up
This
there a
is
little
where a
bit.
sim.
Say
We'll
again.
we'll talk about gliding in the simulator, and how if you had a chance to glide in real flight, with the thermal column indicators on, you would see. Oh yeah, they're right there. And as you have found out, and as anybody who's taken the glider out and managed to catch a couple thermals, you'll realize that it's not too far before you find a column of downdraft air too.
And I think that's what I was experiencing. I'm gonna have to buy one of the little dongles to get my transmitter to communicate so I can fly on the PC. But yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I'd hit up what I assume was an updraft because like the only time I've flown your glider was the previous week, and it was not. We kind of felt some what could have been updrafts, but nothing like what I saw that day because I was flying along and all of
They're
a sudden
there.
she just went nose almost straight up, and I couldn't hardly get the
Mm-hmm.
nose to come down. And then when I
Like
finally,
somebody gave her an uppercut, right?
yeah, and then I mean she was gone, she was up there. And then once I
Yeah.
managed to recover and get that nose back down, finally she'd fly kind of
You were.
level for a few seconds, and then all of a sudden it looked like somebody dropped a rock on her nose because she just straight down she went.
Yeah,
Um,
I always qualify that. Like you were, so basically, you would recover just as you were kind of hitting the outside edge of the air column, and about to hit the downdraft section. And of course, when you did, it's like I always look at it and it's like somebody like swatted the nose of my plane real hard,
mm-hmm,
down, like wah, no, like, well,
yeah,
but I want to fly.
and those columns will come all the way to the ground. Apparently, I did not let it go all the way to the
Yeah.
ground, but there was a couple times like, is she actually like? Did I make her nose heavy by accident? Are my trims
Mm-hmm.
way off? Like, is she? Did she stall? Let me see if I leave it at say 3/4 throttle. Is I'm in what I am assuming is a downdraft. If it's not a downdraft, will she eventually level out because she's picked up enough speed to level off?
Right.
And nah, about the time I get to the top of the trees, I had to full back on the stick
Yep.
to pull her out of the dive. That column seemed to come all the way down. Um, so
Yeah.
I fought that for a while, enjoyed it, but not the flight that I was really after. And then I
You
got her
wanted something a little bit more relaxing.
yeah I got her back up to a decent height, and all of a sudden she just pulled hard to the left, which being a rudder turn and the polydihedrals in the wings on, she just started cutting a left hand turn, and no matter what I was doing with my left right, she was not doing anything but that. Um,
Yeah,
and
that's not right.
yeah, that's not right at all. And pulling hard nose back or nose up, trying to get her to level off, and it was, she was in a tight enough turn that I could not get her level, like even to turn level, obviously, because once you throw rudder into
Mm-hmm.
the mix, it's shoving that nose down anyway a bit. And it
Yeah.
ended up being that it was on the other side of the. In the last episode, though, remember we talked about, there was like front 40 of the school, and there was this ditch that ran through. So it ended up being on the far side of that. And there was some trees growing, so she was cutting these, medium to large size circles, just coming down, and she just happened to come down in the middle of the trees that were out there. Those trees are spaced decently far apart, but I
Yeah,
was
they are.
worried I was going to bite into a tree, and
You can definitely fly like almost slalom through them, although they'll be kind of hard. Be a pretty good challenge, but they're spaced far enough where that if you had like a mini arrow or something like that, something pretty agile, you could probably slalom in between them and have a good time with that
yeah,
without worrying too much about getting completely stuck in the canopies.
yeah, they are separate entities as far as trees go. They're not on top of each other. There's room, but it,
Mm-hmm.
kept circling and circling. Unfortunately, it came down right in the middle of, a group of them. And uh, nothing I was doing on the sticks was going to recover her from it. So I kept the throttle up enough that I had uh, wind blowing over the control surfaces so I could still control her coming down. And then probably about 8 foot off the ground. Of course, I didn't want to powered flight straight into the grass. So about 8 foot off the ground, I throttled back to zero. And once the prop wash fell off the control surfaces, that rudder no longer had
Mm-hmm.
the wind blowing past it to keep her in a turn. So she ended up straightening out, and then the polydihedral of the wing shape took over as she leveled out just before she hit the ground. She was still a touch wing down from the turn, and so
Right.
that bottom of that wing did kind of catch first, which didn't damage it, just enough that it spun the plane on when it landed. Started to walk out there, and as
Yeah.
I was walking over, I could hear a servo steady going once I got
Uh-huh.
started getting kind of close, and then I got over there. Like it was cutting in and out and in and out. Pulled the
Mm-hmm.
wing off and got into the guts, and there's a servo in there just whirring like crazy, and touched plastic casing, and yep, that's hot. So
Yeah.
um,
And
that's
that's
along with
unfortunate. I
that.
mean, it happens. It basically is one of the gears probably stripped for whatever reason. And once it did, the motor couldn't get to the stop point that's in the servo to be able to tell it, okay, we're good. That's enough. Um, or go back to the neutral. And so it kept trying to go back to the neutral. So,
Right, it was certainly trying to get back to, but it just, like you say, the gears had see something went wrong, and the rudder was stuck in the left position. So
yeah.
uh,
I mean,
you know,
they're little tiny, I mean, like microscopic nylon gears. You can only expect so much out of them. I mean, if you're looking for something to be a little bit more reliable as far as the gears are concerned, you can certainly, the metal gears have come down in price significantly. And while the motor doesn't have a lot of extra torque, the metal gears, the teeth will hold, and you're far less likely to have the issue you had
mhm.
with those. Although they may just not work, kind of like any other servo. It seems like when they're that kind of level of cost, where they're a buck or two, or maybe two and a half, um, you're going to get a general failure rate. I think I found between 8 and 9 out of 10 are good, and then maybe one or two are not going to be. So when you
Yeah,
purchase, factor that in. Assume you're going to find a bunch, like a couple out of every 10 that may not work. And if you get better than that, be happy.
yeah, and it was fine. Like it was disappointing
Mm-hmm.
because the day was done, but I needed to get on home
Yeah.
anyway. Um,
Mm-hmm. You still had a full
so
day of flying, which was good.
yeah, well, I had a few minutes of flying, but because again, this was that the week after you and I had gone flying. But that
Mm-hmm.
week, over the nights that week, one of those nights I ended up cutting out the dead servo, popping a new servo in, and so today's Tuesday. This past Saturday, I took her out flying again, and that I had
Well,
one
how'd that go
decent,
then?
yeah, I had one decent kind of flight, where I was still trying to get her trimmed out and figured out, and I tried to do a landing where I was just going to bring her in, land on the asphalt. Oh, it rained that day, so I was trying for an asphalt landing to
Yeah.
not wet the plane. Um, Ended up setting her down
And the
kind of
only
hard.
asphalt out there. Now, were you along the tree line like we were before,
Yes.
or is it a totally different
Yep.
place?
Nope. Right up
Oh
against that
gosh,
tree
so you
line.
were trying to land. You were you were trying to land on the only asphalt, which is like adjacent to a giant 80-foot tree line or 60-foot tree line.
Mm-hmm.
Like 60-foot tall trees, all lining the entire length of this asphalt piece.
Yeah, and
Which,
this
oh, for
section
the
was
love of
not a
Pete,
straight shot. It was
no.
there. It was a bit of a curvy road, so there was no straight approach to come in on this thing. But
Oh no.
yeah, so I'll set her down kind of. Uh, I There's a bit of damage on the motor from where it hit the asphalt. it was fine. I picked her up, and she acted like maybe she was tail heavy. Like I said,
Mm-hmm.
maybe she is tail heavy. Like the CG was perfect for the points. She balanced perfectly. I said maybe I just need to give it a touch on the nose. Maybe she'll fly better. And I shifted the weight around a little bit, and by shifting the
Mm.
weight, I mean I tightened the rubber bands at the back of the wing to
You
no,
shifted the fuselage forward or back
yeah.
entirely.
I shifted, but I did it by tightening the rubber bands coming under the wing, which I'm
Okay.
thinking like it did move the wing, but there's a friction of foam on foam, so maybe once the prop wash got going and there was a bit of that I chucked it, there was a touch of lift on the wings that maybe the wing was then able to move further and really threw the CG off. But that second launch, because I wanted to bring her down and practice a landing, and then okay, now I'll fly it again and make a little adjustment. But I chucked her, the wind had shifted, there was a cross breeze, so I threw her into it, and
Mm.
I didn't throw her lateral in the breeze, like threw her head on into it like you should, but something just, she went straight nose up, just as pretty as you please, and there was no, like, I was nosing down trying, and she wasn't coming down and still going up, and she was looping back towards the tree, so throttle back to 0 so she'd go ahead and flip over nose down.
Right. So she's not going full tilt into the trees.
Right. So, you
Right.
cut,
You're like, no, 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 quick, throttle down.
yep, throttle
Uh
down, get
oh,
her
she
to
has no
flip over.
air. Right.
Throttle down, get her to flip over. And then she was
Goodness.
nose down, but she was only 15 feet up in the air. So I was going to
Yeah.
throttle up and try to get some control of her. But I was also, because I chucked it and she went straight up. Well, I was only 15 feet away from my car. So she went straight
Oh,
up,
no.
and the car was behind me. So when she flipped nose down and started coming down, I was like, that immediate
Oh,
snap
no.
decision of I could try to save it and pull out of it, but if I go the wrong way, I'm taking it into my car. And so I just kept
Right.
throttle killed, and she went straight nose into the asphalt, which,
Yeah.
there's damage on the nut now,
Oh, no.
which is fine. It's
Yeah.
just, it's the
It's just
paint's
scratched.
chipped and dented. And
Yeah, that's. Well, think about that. Even if you had to replace it, you're talking about $1, $1.50, and some time to wait, versus maybe a $300 window in your car, or a dent you got to buff out, or a paint scratch you
mm-hmm.
got to repair. And like it's a relatively new car, so that's the last thing you want to have to deal with. All because you're like, I want to save my $20 plane. No,
Yeah,
you made the right choice.
it
As much as it was
it was
not the
not a
choice you
desirable
wanted.
flight. That flight lasted all of the 5 seconds it took for it to come out of my hand, nose up, cut throttle, and then straight down. So the tail section of the fuselage, the foam gave way. The only thing that kept the tail glued on, it seemed, was the tape that I had put on the underside to protect the belly from being wet if I did do a grass landing, and the
Yeah.
push rods connecting the tail section to the servos. So that's got to be rebuilt at this point, but the fuselage at least. But
Okay.
I'm
Well,
kind of
that's
to the
still.
point that I'm not sure if I'm going to mess around with that again, or if I'm not going to just put that on hold and move on to another project and come back to it,
Mm-hmm.
at a
Yeah,
future
try a
date.
different plane.
Mm-hmm. Like
Worst comes to worst, you could always rebuild the Fogey and put
I
it in there
could.
because that will definitely fly. It flies well. It's a lot of fun. You can get more comfortable with flying and landing and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so you can always do that, or you could aim at my thought, you should always have that thing around just because it's so easy to beat around and have a good time with. Um, but yeah, I urge you to continue to try new projects, new builds.
Yeah,
I know you'll
it's
have fun with it.
it's something I gotta spend an evening contemplating, and do I want to,
Hmm.
like, it's just rebuild the fuselage and the tail section and then glue everything back together. But do I want to mess with that some more, or am I ready to move on to something that's, rebuild the Fogey to have my trusted or move on to a
Yeah.
Spitfire and just come back to. Because you and I talked about how nice Spitfire is, and I commented in the past that a Spitfire was something I wanted to build. So,
Mm-hmm. Right. I really didn't expect it to be as, I'll call it, beginner friendly a plane as it ended up being.
hmm
And now flying it, having flown it on a 3 cell, um, it's still really nice. It just didn't have as wide a range, I guess, which is okay. I mean, that's to be expected. The motor isn't spinning as fast
right.
at all, so it's kind of to be expected. So, but I'm sure that if you built that, you'd have a really good time. If you built one of those or bought one of those, like was it 1,000 kV 13 turn motors, or I think is what it is. They sell on Amazon for awful cheap. Comes with a terrible ESC that works. Again, it gets you there. Sometimes they come with props and servo for like $20 or something like that.
Yeah.
You get something like that size. Just make sure it's got the 10-inch prop, and you'll enjoy flying your Spitfire for a while.
Well, it does
Just
turn
make
out
sure there's
that
vent holes.
make sure there's what now?
Make sure there's vent holes.
Okay, yeah, for
Um,
the excess heat.
Yeah, mainly because the ESC does not handle. There's something about the program of the really cheap ones that it doesn't handle the excess current well, and it heats up far more than it probably should. Somebody did a test and they changed the programming on the ESC itself, like the hardware programming, and when they did that, the uh, the energy management turning to heat was way better, something about the way it's programmed, and it was not getting nearly as hot. And it still functioned as an ESC. So I mean, it still turned the motor just the way you want. That still functioned just the same. So in that sense, it works out great. But as far as the heat that's put out by that ESC without the other programming, which I don't know how to fix, but um, you just go, oh, okay. So it might be something with the cheap versions. But again, they work, they get the job done. I've got a ton of them. They work great, great
Mm.
enough, to get you there.
Well, I think the only thing I would need to do that is a 4 cell battery and a higher amp ESC. It turns out the motor that I have is capable of taking a 4 cell battery. So,
Oh, oh,
yeah.
that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, we had
Oh,
that conversation a couple days ago, but worth mentioning
yeah,
here.
I remember. Yeah, absolutely. And that just means that the motor's going to spin faster because it's getting more volts. But
Right.
the motor can only do so much work. And so, thereby, if you up the cell count, you need to consider reducing the motor diameter or the prop diameter or the pitch. But I mean, if it's designed for a 10.45 pitch, that's about as low as the 10-inch props come. So you're really just going to have to decrease the prop size. So you don't overload the motor. And it's basically, I think it's by an inch.
Yeah, I'll look at the side of the motor. It's got a little print
Hmm.
on it that says 3 cell, prop this, 4 cell, prop that. So I'll have a look at that, and
Yep.
if I need to order a different prop for when I'm running a 4 cell battery, I can work on
Yep.
that.
Good. For the listeners who may not have the flight test battery or flight test motors, the newer ones have the actual the prop spec on the motor. That's one of the ones you have. Um, just go back to the manufacturer's website on that motor. Most of them have a table, and they will tell you, um, what if you're using a 4 cell, how big of a prop is too much for the speed controller you have.
Okay.
Just make sure to double check it before you start linking things up, because you might melt your ESC or let out the magic smoke at least. So good,
All right. Are
cool.
we ready to talk simulators?
Yes, I think we are. Actually, been flying well. We've been talking a little bit here,
Oh,
and one of
really?
my
Multitasking over there, huh?
something like that. Look, I'm flying a Bloody Baron.
Okay.
FT, because they have FT models in both of the sims that I'm going to talk about, both of the main sims. Um, and honestly, we went through a lot. There's a lot of different simulators out there. Um, but it seemed like over the last handful of years, there's really only been a couple like major ones. And again, they're sponsored by Horizon Hobby, or they're by a certain manufacturer. I think Great Plains was originally the one who made Real Flight, and I think Great Plains went under, and they ended up getting bought out by Horizon Hobby, and Horizon Hobby is now basically making sure that Real Flight now has all of their planes. So when you go buy their that simulator, if you have bought one of their planes, you can sim with it for a long time and get very comfortable with it. And when you go out in the field, you're going to have a very similar experience. So when you get out there, it's not going to be all new. It just may be a little bit different, and that's usually most people can adjust for that difference. And maybe you have more obstacles. Maybe you have different flight characteristics at your field, like you've got stronger winds or something like that. Um, but anyway, you can hopefully translate what you learned in the sim and what you got comfortable with orientations of how the plane looks in different spots in the sky and how your sticks move the plane around, which I've been crashing into the ground a lot. Um, but basically, you can translate that directly into your skills at the field so that when you get there, you're not taking a plane and tossing it into the ground only so that you can just go rebuild one about seconds after you started. That tends to be pretty discouraging.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it can be.
I don't, and I think anybody in the hobby too, like anybody who's in it. I know it. A lot of us don't want to seem like we don't know what we're talking about when we're new. There's a certain amount of like pride, as well as not wanting to be maybe humiliated or whatever. But you have to think that, and it's not everybody, but the majority of the people in this hobby love it. And they're only excited when more people say, I'm interested. How do I get to where you are? So, um, don't hesitate to ask questions if you're there. Lean on their experience. They will do everything they know how to help you. Um, so, I mean, when you look at simulators, to kind of bring it back to the topic, when you come to simulators, the trick is to like, a lot of people are like, well, why? What's the point? It's like $100. Geez, that's almost as much as a transmitter. I can get a transmitter and a whole, setup for that $100. Like, why would I spend that kind of money, right? So, when you think about it, you got to think about like, well, what they are, right, and what they're for. So, I mean, what they are is simulated reality um, of what RC planes are like to fly in the sky. So they basically create a physics model, and the company who has built the simulator builds models of the plane, so representations of the plane, and give it characteristics that respond like real life, or at least as close as they can get. Um, and and then they basically put it in that environment, and then they give you or let you use the transmitters you have. Right now I'm using my Jumper T16. It's for me the easiest one to get in here. I've had a radio link forever. I used it for a bit. I think my trainer port connection was a bit glitchy. Not a knock on radio link, probably because I dropped it or something. um, but um, but once you're hooked in, you can use the transmitter used out of the field, and that's kind of one of the important pieces. Your goal is to get really comfortable with how you would go out to the field. You want to be comfortable with the transmitter. You want to have the profile that you're flying be similar to how you're setting up that exact plane when you're out at the field, right? The goal is to have very little difference between what you're practicing on the simulator and what you're going to do when you go out there with a real model that can get very busted when things go wrong. Or it can give you amazing joy, and it may give you amazing joy even if it gets busted, like we found out. Um,
Hmm.
so basically, it gives you, it's trying to give you as accurate a simulation as possible of true flight conditions and flight reactions of RC models before you get out there. And of course, each of the ones we're going to talk about, for the most part, they have a variety of aircraft, maybe not a wide variety, and sometimes that's not a bad thing. But they'll have a whole list of planes. Like I said, Real Flight will have like all of the Horizon Hobby lineup, or if it's not Horizon, I can't remember who ended up buying it, but it was originally Great Planes. So all of the Great Planes, I promise you, were in that simulator when you got it. But there's a whole community in each one of these of people who want to get their plane in there. And I have found on both of these simulators I'm going to talk about, they have flight test planes in there, both of them. So, and that's, I'll call it maybe about 80% of the original lineup. So the FT Arrow, the FT Storch, the Simple Soar, it'll have the Bloody Baron, and a whole bunch of the Explorer, FT Explorer. So again, you can try out what each one of them feels like in the air. Now remember, they're going to come perfectly trimmed, right? And they're not going to have anything wrong with it, which when you build it yourself, like that may happen. And that's the goal, right? When we build it, we're trying to get it square and true and all the surfaces perpendicular so they react like we hope. I don't know, but life is life, and sometimes you're looking away at the cat doing something weird in the corner or something, and while you're doing that, the glue is hardening the fuselage at an angle, which you didn't see until now the glue's solid. So without getting a heat gun and trying to redo everything, you go, looks pretty good. It'll probably be okay, and you take it out of the field. And so this isn't going to, simulators are assumed more or less perfect conditions. But what they can do though is they have simulated weather. So they can give you gusty wind, they can give you light wind, they can have rain, they could have basically generally calm weather, but with occasional gusts. A lot of them, almost every single one that I've run into, and one of them is specifically for slope soaring practice, is they'll have a slope soaring hill and it'll have that same wind conditions that you have that are good for like slope soaring. They're typically at the tops of hills, and it's a very different wind pattern and wind condition set. And when you get familiar with how to do it, it's really cool because if you Flight Test has a video, a number of other people have videos on it. And what the cool part is without any motors, you can take a balanced plane, even though it's slightly nose heavy plane, and you'll see these guys, they throw it off a cliff, and you're like, oh my gosh, you're throwing it towards the water on a cliff. Um, but that's where the wind's coming. And what they can do is they fly their planes back and forth across the slope without any motor. And they fly it for like, an hour. And it can get going incredibly fast. So you don't think that you have to have these gentle flyers or anything. You can get going pretty fast. They always have planes. They have gliders. They have quads. Almost all of them have at least one or two quads. A lot of them have helis. Most of them are not terribly accurate at modeling helis, but they'll give you a sense of it. So to see if you go, whoa, that was cool. Maybe I want more. And we'll go over a couple helis based on other recommendations. I haven't checked them out. I'm not into helis. I've got, I think I purchased one really small one. A lot of fun, and I was told I can do a lot of the tricks that helis can do. I'm not that good of a pilot. I'll get there maybe, but I'll give you a couple of recommendations. You can check it out. And they'll also give you the idea of FPV. Like if you were to put a camera on this model, this is what it might be like. So you can kind of get a sense of how that's different. And part of the reason why they put that on there is because quadcopters, a lot of quadcopter pilots fly using the FPV equipment, so the first person view equipment. And so, and then the other thing is most of these also have a kind of I'll call it a board or a special location where it is set for thermaling. So it's not just gliding and or slope soaring, but it's thermaling. So it's learning how to read wind patterns and how to read how a glider reacts as it's going through. And the cool part is you can turn on the arrows to indicate how the air is flowing, right? So you can see the clouds moving, you can see the arrows indicating the direction of wind, and you can watch your plane fly through those and see how it reacts, which would definitely probably help you, Joe, and understand what the heck was going on that day,
Hmm.
that you were getting kind of punched in the nose. Your plane was getting punched around in the nose. Um, oh, and the other thing is water landings. They'll have a bunch of like water boards where you're hanging out on a dock at somebody's lake. And most of them, they even have a way of you. Somebody may have taken a picture of the field you fly at and done a 360 panorama. And there's a way to do that. And then they released it to the wild. And if you download it, you can basically fly at your own field or one just like it. And it's like a. And what they'll do is they'll probably put like an estimate of obstacles. So while the picture is just sort of a picture that's sort of pasted around a globe, if you will, they will put like reference obstacles so that it looks like you're like, I'm flying over the house, but if I don't pull up in time, I'm going to actually hit the top of the tree. And they the physics isn't great where you're like, it's going to hit just like you hit a tree, but it's going to hit and say you hit a barrier and it's going to break apart and then you'll kind of reset. So the cool part about it is how can they help, right? It's like it's about how you view it, right? If my kids look at it and they go, "Ooh, it's a game," and I tell them like it's not a game. It looks like it, but it's a tool. It's a tool so that when you go out to the field, you don't crash your plane that you just built. So you think of it more like a training tool, and it's training your brain and your muscle memory to know what to do instinctively when things aren't going right in real life. So, like Joe and I were when we were flying together, we each had a moment where we had to choose down and left or down and right. We
Hmm.
instinctively went with one, and I think both of us chose the wrong one. Although I had a couple other moments where I had to choose, I chose properly. Um, like when I was coming at the trees and I did that, that whole moment.
That's
Um,
right.
but but so the simulators can help you practice that reaction and get you to get it right. So that way, when you're out there and you're going, oh no, your body will know what to do, as well as it'll help orientations. So the hardest part I have when doing loops and planes, it's like with you're doing the oval loop or whatever, just fly around, just to kind of get a sense, like to understand, am I flying perpendicular to the runway? Or am I flying parallel to it? How far out am I? Am I way out there? Am I close? Um, and then also, I find for me out in the field, it's hardest to see, am I going away and up or towards me and down or vice versa, or towards me and up? So I can't tell, is it going away or towards? And until I start turning, and if I'm, one accident high, that could be deadly to the plane. Um, but getting training in the simulator, I have a better understanding as to what the plane should look like depending on where it's at.
Hmm.
So being familiar with that makes a big help. And I know all the heli guys are like, dude, you need to know your orientations because it's easy. A heli is basically a football with a boom on the end of it, and it's kind of silhouetted no matter which way you look at it, and it's really tough to tell, is it facing me or is it facing away? Is that, am I flipping up around, or what's going on? So um, that's really important. um, let's see some of the things you might want to look for. So one of the things, okay, well, what would you look in the? Oh yeah, we'll talk about flight sims in about a second because I think they both go for both of these, right? Like all of these simulators, these are kind of things you want to look for. Like, how does that interface with what you have, right? Do you have FPV goggles you want to use? Can it interface with that? You want to check that, right? Kind of like when you check with a product, does my printer work with this computer kind of deal? Um, does this program have a hard time linking up with my transmitter? Or is it easy and people are like, oh, yeah, that one's not a problem? Or is there a lot of help? This transmitter doesn't connect with my stuff. What does it need to connect? Um, there's two I'm going to talk about. Well, three. One is Phoenix 5.5. And that needs a special dongle because it was done kind of created way back in the day when hardware keys were the thing. And it kind of stopped being produced just after that stuff started to change, or just as it was. Real Flight has something very similar. It's basically a cord, it's a box, it's a button, and the USB connection connects with the thing. And if you can press the button, it means you've got one of these boxes. And if you've got one of these boxes, you're good to go. That means that you got this product from a Real Flight purchase and it's not some bootleg copy. And they're just trying to make sure that it isn't, one person isn't buying it, making a clone and just sending it out to everybody. In which case, how are they going to market the next version of the product? How are they going to pay for their people, right? That's kind of important. Um, so does it need a dongle of some sort? Is it still supported, right? Phoenix 5.5, that kind of went belly up. Again, the company went down. Nobody picked the software up. And so the software is no longer supported. Well, the cool part is you can download a copy, like an image of that software, and install it yourself, and kind of at your own risk. You can buy a bootleg dongle off of like Banggood or Amazon has a bunch of those things, eBay, and get that. And it's cheap, and it allows your transmitter to talk to the game and the game to think, "We're good. Let's go fly."
Mm-hmm.
It's not supported. You're not paying for development anymore. So it's okay. You want to check, does it have training programs? I know the two I have, two I'm going to talk about have training programs. I think even the sim, the gliding sim has a bit of a training program. And what kind of training program is it? Is it the one you kind of want? Like, is it going to ghost what you should be doing with what you are so you can kind of like match it as best you can? Or is it just going to show you stuff and say, this is how to do it? Look at the sticks. We're going to show you those. Like, what's happening here is happening with these stick controls. Kind of compare the two, watch a lot, and try it yourself when you're done with watching this. And also, a lot of people are like, well, I don't want to pay $100 for a transmitter. Are there interactive? Are there gates? Is it racing? Right. What kind of contests are there? Are there interactive terrains? Can I use a multiplayer? Is there a multiplayer mode? Are there servers I can get on and hang out and fly with other people? Because that can be a lot of fun. Basically, get together, kind of like we are on Discord, and just talk. And while you're talking, you're flying all together in the same space.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you're trying to think, oh, I don't want to use my transmitter, a lot of people are like, well, but I've got an Xbox controller, that should work, right? And all I can say is it will work, but what it's not going to do is teach you how throttle control management really works. When you're out in the field, it's going to be very different because the throttle stick doesn't have a center on it, right? But all of the Xbox controllers and game controllers, they all center back up. So unless you know how to
Right.
like take that out, it's going to be very different. Plus they have very different feels to them. The gimbals are different. The sensors are different. So,
Mm-hmm.
but I mean, otherwise, I mean, if you have nothing and you want to try, that'll at least get you the idea of left is left, like the ailerons. Like when it's going away from you, left and right are the same, but when it's coming at you, it's reversed. So it'll help you get that kind of orientation, mind, kind of working to automate. Like right now, I don't even think about it. When the plane's coming back at me, I don't think, oh God, the controls are reversed. Although if I fly upside down, all I think is down is up and up is expensive. And That's all I can. That's all I think of. Um, it's I don't know. Uh, so and sometimes even if that's all you have, and you want to get into this because it looks really exciting, you can give it a try. What you're not going to do is you're not going to be training your brain to react properly when you have a plane in the field using your transmitter. And that is the purpose of simulators, is to get your mind trained and ready to handle flying an RC plane how you want it. It's also a great way to test a bunch of new maneuvers you want to try. Like I'll tell you what, if I tried to do what is that where the plane goes sideways across a knife edge. So plane's almost going like 45 degrees sideways across the runway. Um, every time I've tried it, I've done it like 6 accidents high and had to bail out about, 10 feet in. I can try it in the simulator and I can crash it 500 times. I'm not losing any extra money. I'm not even losing a whole lot of time. And I'm training my brain on the stick movements I need to do and how long and how far pretty well. So at least it gives me a shot when I'm out in the field to give it a try and have success.
Mhm.
Um, so I mean, that kind of talks about like what they're for and what we should be looking for when we try to go buy one. And then I guess the next one is to talk about what kind of sims are there, right? And I think a lot of that boils down to what's the focus of what you want to fly. You and I talk about planes, right? But there's more than just planes. We talked about gliding. That's a very different type of flying, right, Joe?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it's different. Um, and then there's paramotors out there, and there are like even sims just for paramotoring. And quadcopters. That's a huge separate niche, separate market. You have the Drone Racing League and DCL, Drone Championship League, I think, and a couple others. Liftoff is and Freerider FPV. Those are just four quick programs. I know there's more out there, and they're growing every day because it's a hot part of the hobby, and it's new and it's evolving still. So it's really pretty exciting, but um, and that's also a high learning curve. So the Sims really make a difference in success. I know I've sat on Sims and I've just started to get okay with the Sims, and it directly translates to how okay I am to fly my little quads around my yard. I've been doing okay, but sitting on the Sims and making some effort to get comfortable has made a big difference. Um, and then, of course, there's heli simulators because helis are a totally different animal. They're a 4 foot whirring blade that can come at you and go away, turn upside down, and shoot into the sky faster than you can say Bob's your uncle, I think is the Australians say. And that one, you think, okay, let's make sure I am at least comfortable with the controls. So if something is starting to go wrong, I know how to either get out of it or at least how to bail out of it safely. Because they can be pretty dangerous if you're unable to handle it. Let's see. And then there's the other thing is like now with your phones basically being mini computers in your pockets. That's right. I'm making sound like an old man. There's a whole slew of them on your phone too. So when you're hanging out at the airport waiting for your flight or something like that, or maybe you're waiting for a friend, you can pull out your thing and play Real Flight on your phone. Or there's a couple other RC Flight Sim I really enjoyed because I tried that. I really liked it because it called out maneuvers and it was there to teach you how to do the maneuver and practice it. It's not the best simulator, but it it taught me what those moves were. Like I didn't know what an Immelman was, or a Cuban 8, or any of the other maneuvers. Hammerhead. Like what are those? I don't know. They're just a bunch of names. No, they're maneuvers, and if you know what they look like and kind of how to get to them, they can really improve your flight and the enjoyment other people get from seeing you fly around at the sky at the field. So let's see. Okay, That's a lot. I know you have one, and I really haven't. I'll go into more detail about the planes, about the two, Real Flight and Phoenix. But there's one more that I'm missing that I know you have a lot of experience with. I'd like to take a minute for you to talk about that. Could you?
Yeah, and yeah, that's fine. So where I learned to fly, uh, it was back during high school. But Microsoft Flight Sim at that time it was Microsoft Flight Sim 2002. Now they've got newer versions of it, and I went
Mm-hmm.
online to YouTube as we were doing the research for this to look at the newer ones and see do they still have the training modes, or are they more just games now? Of
Right.
you get in there, you get to fly a plane, they drop you in a cockpit, and off you go. And you can certainly do that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I used to do that when I was doing the flight sim in high school, and we actually had a after school club, the Aero Club, I think it was, that we called it, and it was
Mm-hmm.
we just hung out after school and flew simulators in the ROTC room, and yeah, we would you know once someone had gone through the training process or the training program within the flight sim, then we got into free flight, and we had actually managed to link the computers together in the ROTC room,
Right. And
so we were
credit
actually able to
land.
go see each other as we were able to see each other as ghosts on each other's screens, and we
Oh,
did
that's awesome.
some actual point to point racing in Cessnas,
Oh, that's so much
which
fun.
was it was super fun. But yeah, so while looking back or looking up some, trying to research a little bit of this, I can say that the newer flight sims do still, or the Microsoft flight sims do still have the training program that I recall going through, and I think they're still using the same uh, training audio.
Yeah.
It was a guy. I think it was a
Congratulations
fellow by
on
the name of
landing your
Rod.
plane. I'm Rod
Maybe
Michelson, or whoever.
it might be him. I can tell you the line that caught my ear
What
was
was that?
"Well, hold up there, rocket pants," or whatever it was.
Oh my
It
god.
was just very reminiscent. And yeah, it was like this guy, I think Rod something, that they used, and I guess he had a flight series or something. I don't know, but
Sure.
they're using his audio. But it has an in-game flight certification that really, at that time we were it started you in a Cessna, and it walked you
Mm-hmm.
through takeoff, climbing, level flight, descending. It taught you about glide slopes, and you know you're flying a plane, so you're looking at your runway, and you got your lights that are off to the side of the runway, and I forget what those are called aside from glide slope indicators, but they're
Mm-hmm.
lights that you utilize to set up and tell you if you're on the correct glide slope, too high, too low.
Right. Or
Um,
a little tad left or
and
tad right. Yeah.
right, and you learn about the descent rates, you learn about stall conditions. You learn that if you nose up and you don't have enough speed to carry you through, then your plane's going to lose lift. It's going to want to nose down to recover from that. And you there's a learning center in there that has a lot of information that kind of explains a lot of the principles and what's going on. It's
Mm-hmm.
far more like there's a lot of information in there that's not necessarily going to pertain
Yeah.
to RC flight, because you're talking about the various instruments on board, and visual flight rules versus instrument flight rules, and they've got the it's been so long, but where you can navigate radio tower to radio tower. They've got
Mm-hmm.
specific dedicated radio towers, VTOL stations or something that you can
Right.
dial into and
And
set the
that's
heading you're trying to approach on.
right. And so if you're training to become a full scale pilot, some of the hardest parts of that are to get familiar with, and I'll call it I want to say calm, but not panicked by what happens when you approach different airports and things like that, and how to handle that. There's a lot that's when, you have a lot to do as a pilot. Otherwise, you're mostly driving the bus. Um, so like that's what it's for, is to train that. Obviously, as an RC pilot, that doesn't have a huge, I guess, doesn't have a huge play, right? But the takeoff and landing thing, I mean, obviously that's paid off in dividends just watching you fly.
Well, when I can manage to take off and land properly. But what so much of what you've commented on in the past and in our time together flying, the principles that I have that I'm trying to carry over into RC flight, which do and don't directly carry over. They
Mm-hmm.
do in flight principles, they don't in that I'm flying controller on the ground, are principles I learned in an actual flight sim where I'm sitting in the cockpit and flying the plane. And what we've come to realize is that I am more of a scale flyer. I fly the planes the way I understand that you fly a plane properly. I don't tend to get wild right now.
Mm-hmm.
I
Right. You're
want
not
to,
banging sticks around.
as much as possible. Yeah, when I come in for an approach and I'm trying to set up a landing, you've seen me swing wide, set up a long approach. I try to set up that glide path coming in, and
Mm-hmm.
you saw it with your simple soar. Every time I come in for a landing, I'm trying to. I guess they call it greasing the landing, but
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
come in and I'm at a certain throttle point. I'm keeping my nose where I want it. I bring it in, and right before I hit the ground, I cut the throttle and I do what's called the landing flare, which is where I pitch that nose up to spoil and try to slightly set the back of the plane down and then let it drop down onto the front.
Yep.
With the light foamies that we're flying, it doesn't
It's a
really
little harder
trans.
to pull off because there's less momentum to kind of carry you through the flare, I think.
Yeah.
And maybe that's it. I don't know, who knows. But either way, it's not easy. But when you try that though, if you do it at the right height, it just sets down like a feather.
Mm-hmm.
If you do it wrong though,
It.
it gets us tons of lift and lifts way up, and you're like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
that's gonna nose down hard. Shoot. And then at that point, because it's an RC plane, you can almost gun the throttle and get some speed and to make another pass. Whereas like in a real plane, that's probably not a good idea. I'm suspecting.
It's so there are points at which you can, even in say the Cessna, if you're coming in for an approach and you realize my approach is off, there are points where you can say, I can go ahead and pull out of this. There are points where you're too far gone and you're just like, yeah, I can pull off the runway and go, but I'm going to tag the runway as I go. I'm still going to
Mm-hmm.
hit it and keep going, do a touch and go. Um, but there are a lot of principles that you'll learn in a proper flight sim that
Mm-hmm.
they set the foundation for what is happening even with our RC planes.
Yes.
I went sidetrack for just a second. Tell a story about one thing I did. Um,
Sure.
and anyone who has tried this with, and in your case, something similar with your glider, but you weren't trying to land it; you were just trying to pull out the dive.
Oh
Um,
no. Yeah.
I took in the simulator. I took a Cessna up to service altitude, which I think was like, it's been so long.
It's probably
It might have
1,200
been
feet or
like
something.
12,000 feet probably.
Okay.
Um,
It's way up there.
because you're like Cessnas cruise around at like 1,500 feet normal, 2,000 feet. That's not a problem for them. But I took it up to service altitude, which was where the game said, okay, the air is too thin, you don't have enough velocity, you're stalling.
Oh, okay, right, yeah.
Um, yeah, and so I took it all the way up and flew at an airport runway, and when I was about probably half a mile from the end of the runway, I nosed it straight down and went into a perfectly straight down dive. And my intent behind that was just playing around the simulator was I want to see if I can land this plane properly doing this this janky maneuver. Long
Mm-hmm.
story short, I did. Uh, you know, like I don't know, 500 feet off the ground, yank back on the stick, which because of the way the game physics were set up, it allowed it to do it, and she immediately just wanted to go almost nose directly up in the air. So it was, I was holding the nose down the whole time, the whole dive, and then let it go. She nosed up, having to hold the nose down onto the runway, deploying full flaps, trying to bleed speed and get her to come on down and stick to
Mm-hmm.
the runway so I could get the. I mean, real physics. There are things that are not accurate because
Right.
that plane would have the wings would have snapped clean off. I should have never been able to pull that landing off. But I don't know.
But
It was a
it was
fun
interesting to
exercise
try.
in.
Yeah, yeah. And of course, by doing so, it you almost like were able to tell yourself like, okay, I understand the physics of how this flare thing functions, and I'll be able
Right.
to use that, especially even in a pinch, to go oh crud. And then to me, it equates to when the heli guys talk about an auto rotation, where basically you've lost power, you let the motor spin, then you change basically reverse the pitch and let the momentum of the blade cushion your landing to the point where you slow down
Mm-hmm.
so much that you're hovering, and then you change the pitch and then you allow yourself to come down as the blades are basically slowing from the now counter counter pitch, but you use your downward momentum of the natural falling motion of the helicopter to basically start the the flywheel of the motor plate. You give it that energy, and you basically are storing it in the blades until you get right about to the bottom. And so you're looking at this plane like, oh my god, that's coming right at us. Oh no! And then they just kind of switch thing, do the thing, kind of wheel the plane of that up into, like you said, like a flare, and with that, off they go. You know, they're ready to go.
Mm-hmm.
And then they touch it down like a feather, which is pretty cool. So even without power, like you say, oh, well, if I don't have power in my plane, it's a glider, and if I don't have power in my helicopter, I can still touch it down light as a feather. You know,
Right.
so it's a neat thing. So anyway, good. I want to. I
Yeah.
would.
I can talk for hours
Yeah, I
on
know,
it.
right? I love seeing you do that too. I love watching you come down and flare out the landing and it, greasing it, as you said. I'm looking forward to seeing that again with whatever your next plane ends up being. So I guess that brings us to talking. Let's talk about the plane simulators for RC that I've had experience with. I think we talked about, let's see, we talked about quads. I went through those briefly. I don't have a lot to say except I've flown liftoff. Um, it'll definitely get you to the point where you can take out your own quad and fly it. Um, just
Mm.
know that you're going to crash a lot and get used to it. Try some racing. It'll give you some incentive. Um, heli simulators. Let me go through those really quick, just so you have them, and then we'll talk about Real Flight 7.5. They're up to 9 now. Real Flight 9, and it's now owned by Horizon Hobby. Um, so we'll talk about that, and then we'll talk about Phoenix 5.5. But before the heli recommendations, a lot of the heli guys, the simulators they use are HeliX, Absolute Heli RC, and AccuRC. I think AccuRC and HeliX tend to be the biggest ones. I know AccuRC is available on Steam, which if you're a Steam user, that might be just the easiest way to get it. Um, and you go on the heli forums and have them help you set up the transmitter so that it's going to be similar to how you would set up a heli that you might own. Um, and then go through their tutorials. Almost all of these other tutorials, they have helicopters and they're not tutorials, the simulators. When they have the tutorials, there's a big section on heli tutorials, how to take off, how to land, how to hover. And I think they have one small section on like, these are some of the tricks you might try. Um, and they have the similar thing for planes, but it tends to be a little bit less. All right. So I think the biggest thing with either of these is that it'll give you that left, right, right, left orientation that tends to confuse new pilots with when you're going away and when you're coming back, as well as generally giving you an understanding as to how to look at the really tiny dot in the sky and from it, from the silhouette, more or less, be able to tell where your plane is going or coming. And being familiar with that really makes a big difference out in the field, because oftentimes you don't have the luxury of like waiting a half a minute to figure it out, right? In about a half a minute, the plane is either going to be in the ground or so far away you can't see it, or it's out of battery, in which case, good luck, that kind of thing. So, oftentimes you don't really have a ton of time to figure it out. So being familiar with it gives you the time you need to recover from whatever is going wrong, if there is something, and allows you to bring it back to you safely. And then also, the cool part about all of these sims, I mean, every single one of them, no matter how, I'll call it, small or robust they are, they allow you to check out different plane types. So they allow you to try gliders, and they allow you to try twin engines, big planes, little planes, giant planes. They allow you to try jets. They allow you to try turbines, some of them, helis, quads, all that kind of stuff. So if you want to explore the hobby and you don't have a ton of money, buy one of these, and you can explore the hobby at no additional cost. I think they're $99 typically or thereabouts. If you need one with a transmitter, they're usually an extra $80. They used to have that transmitter was one you could take to the field and fly with. So it wasn't like it was wasted money. Not wasted, but it wasn't like it was redundant money spent. It was something that you could use. So Real Flight, 7.5. It's what I've flown for a long time. It was honestly the only simulator I could kind of get working for a long time. So by default, it was my go-to. It has a lot of great core planes to both commercially available. So like you could buy expansion packs and things like that. They obviously have all the Horizon and Great planes as part of the general base library to pull from. And if you go onto the Knife Edge forums, Knife Edge, I guess, was the original manufacturer of the product. So they kind of continue to store the custom built planes done by users, as well as ones that they put together themselves. There's a ton of really cool custom user designs, up to like an Avro Vulcan that's probably about 30 feet long. That's what it looks like according to what it drops on the field. There's a Dragon Lady that thing, it almost breaks the sound barrier. It goes so darn fast. It goes crazy. I think it's like 400 miles an hour or 450, according to the heads-up display that you can put up on there. It starts telling you like what direction you're heading, how high you are, and of course like how fast you're going with airspeed and whatnot. And he was just like, "What the heck?" So it's like at 88 miles an hour or something close to that. It kicks on basically the afterburner that's in the thing, and it goes from like 88 to like 400 in about 3 seconds, and you can just start seeing the terrain start whizzing by. And of course, you're probably pretty far up there, but like you start bringing it close to the mountains and stuff. I think one of the things I like about Real Flight, both of the ones I'm going to talk about, Phoenix and Real Flight, have a large collection in the custom group of flight test planes if you're into flight test, and other makers of planes. And they also have almost all the warbirds, all the jets. So if you want World War I, World War II, so if you want the SE-5, if you want the Camel, was Sopwith Camel, those are like the World War II or World War I planes, World War II. So you have the Spitfire, P-38, the Mustang, any of the German planes. So you're like any of the Horten wings, the Messerschmitt 262, which is one of the first jets, as well as the Zero and the I'm naming off a bunch of planes, as well as some of the basic ones like the Texan, which people love that plane. It's a very agile plane. It's slow, but it can speed up. It can do a lot of acrobatics. Um, and I think it's basically like a repurposed World War II plane for the most part. And then they have a bunch of jets like Tomcats and F-22s and things like that, as well as the Cubs, like simple Cubs. And they even have models with safe on it in the newer models. Because 7.5, I think, was before the safe system came out. But I know Real Flight 9, you can choose models with safe and without. So they'll have that built-in kind of auto-correcting intelligence in it, as it were. And it will, a little sister flying just like the little simple Cub would do. So you can even test to see the difference between, is it worth getting the safe or is it not? How do I set that up? Well, I can set it up and test it. And then when I get it, I can actually just use that same profile that I have in my transmitter and just connect it to the model I bought. And you're kind of halfway there, right? So there's a lot of benefits with that. And again, you're going to have stuff that flies off the water, stuff that's a hand launch. Sometimes it has gear. Sometimes the gear retracts. Some of them are really complex where they have flaps, they have partial flaps, they have bomb drops, they have lights, they have, just like if you built a custom model and it had all of these features, you want to be able to test out how to fly and use those features and not crash your plane. So it's useful to have a plane that has a bunch of extra bells and whistles so that you can practice without crashing, right? So it's good. I'm trying to think. They have a bunch of different settings. So you'll have a waterfront, you'll have common fields like a regular flying field. You have those 360-degree panoramic views. They'll also have like castles. They'll also have a pylon flying field with stands, as well as something with hoops. And then there'd be a bunch of custom stuff if you want to download, where people put literally just a series of floating platforms and gates everywhere, as well as buildings to weave in and out of. Take your pick. I think you and I, when you first came over, you flew the Real Flight in, I'll call it like a little airfield outside of a construction site near a city.
Yep.
And, that's enough there where you can kind of practice weaving in and out of buildings, landing on a strip, or, going really fast and going through a city or going over top. It gave you a lot of options. What did you think when you flew that part? Do you think that was silly, or did you think I could see this being useful?
Inactivity alarm.
I definitely saw the benefit from it. At that time, we had not I was not up to speed on how I would be able to get my transmitter connected to be able to do that, but I definitely enjoyed it. I had not been flying the models yet. I don't recall. Did that happen before or after I had gotten my kit from you?
It was probably close to. I think it was right after. It was shortly after.
Either way,
Yeah.
Either way, it was enjoyable to fly, and I could see where, even at that time, where the benefit to get out of it was being familiar with which way the plane's facing, how is it going to handle, and if it's looking at me, which way are my wings going to tilt when I do it. I knew it was a training tool at the time.
Mm-hmm. Right. As well as it, you can change the wind conditions. Like you can change the weather conditions so that way you don't have to limit yourself to going, okay, there's no wind today. I can go out and fly. Like if you practice flying in the wind, you're sort of, okay, now I know what it is. Cool. I think I've got it in my head. Now I can go out and try it out in real life, and now all of a sudden the days that you can go out and fly have opened wider. Um, I was kind of like that until I took my simple sore out right before a storm. I think we had talked about this. Um, and I threw it directly in the wind, and it literally the wind grabbed it and just tossed it, not just behind me, but behind the fence and behind the car, and hit the wheat or whatever the heck was growing behind. I think it's probably tobacco or whatnot behind all of that. And it like just took it and just smacked it. It took it in a big loop and just smacked it into the ground. I was like, oh, that sucks. Like I didn't expect
Mm.
that's the first thing that would happen the second it released from my hand. And it's because it was gusty and windy, and I just released it and I was releasing it like I would on a calm day, where you're like 75% throttle, easy on the elevator and kind of get ready and just toss and let it go. Like, no, it's really windy. You throw full throttle and you heave it into the wind if you can. Or maybe just let it go. Let the wind take it up. And don't even worry about throwing it. Just let the wind do it and throw it at 45 degrees to the wind maybe. But like you can practice that in the sim and be comfortable with it, so that way you can go out on those days and go, okay, I'm going to bring the plane and can handle it, and then we're going to have fun. As opposed to be going, oh my God, what's going on? My plane is going to crash in 2 seconds. It's going to be terrible. Which is kind of although then I switched my brain. I switched and went, oh, this is like slope soaring, because I had practiced it in the sim. And I was like, oh, and I also watched people online. Like I watched YouTubers who that's their flying site. They love slope soaring, and they literally live like near the cliffs in some New Zealand town or something like that, and they just drop it off the cliff and glide around back and forth, and it looks great. And I'm like, oh, it's like that. Okay, so I started flying my glider like that in the wind. Now, granted, it was a motorized glider, and I was cranking the motor, but I was able to fly back and forth across the field like it's slope soaring, and it was a lot of fun. And I stopped kind of panicking that this wind is going to take my plane and take it 40 acres behind me where I'm never going to get it. So that was pretty cool. Phoenix 5.5. I'll call it. It's very similar. I think the graphics are, to me, they're more pleasing. Like I felt like Real Flight was at the time a little bit more blocky, and Real Flight is probably more realistic with the gloss and the pretty. Um, the flight physics seem to be about the same. I think it's more sensitive to crashes than Real Flight, but I think you can set that. The training program in that one, instead of having examples to fly by and then you sort of match up with the arrows or the guidelines they give you, which is what Real Flight does for, I think it's only takeoffs and landings. Still really helpful because that's the kind of scariest part. Phoenix just sort of has, like, they have tutorial videos, so they show you what the sticks are doing, and they show you how the plane is going, and it's basically on an endless loop, so you can keep watching it without having to touch anything, and just keep watching, so you pick up each piece of it. But what I didn't see was a way for you to play alongside and do your best to match what the tutorial was showing you. Now, what Phoenix did that Real Flight I didn't see do was Phoenix also has a vast tutorial on maneuvers. So it goes over all the, I'll call it standard maneuvers. There's probably about 15 of them, about what a knife edge is, how to do it. Because again, it's that same kind of tutorial where they're showing you the sticks, they're showing you the plane, and then there's a brief conversation about what's happening and why, and like things to watch for, which is really helpful. So as a tutorial, you're not doing it alongside, but you're able to still do it. And both of those games have challenges in it. I think both of them have like levels. Like if you keep doing these challenges and succeeding, you're going to learn these techniques you need to do, like landing on a spot and then making the spot smaller. Like as you get better, the spot's going to get smaller and smaller. So in part, think of it like I want to land in front of me every time. I'm not looking to run across the runway. and the whole field to go find my plane. Like I'd like to land it right in front of me every time so I could just walk out, grab it, and come back. The only way to do that is to practice landing it in front of you. So each of those has kind of like a spotlight. And I think that's one of the competitions. Like when you go into the AMA competitions, that's one of the pieces or components of it. They usually have a balloon pop. They'll usually have things with gates where you basically run through the certain gates and come back and land. And most of the time you can do those either FPV or you can do them standing on the ground. Now, I'll promise you, from the viewpoint of the ground, it's way harder than FPV going through those loops or gates. And there's a bunch of challenges like that. So both of them have very similar aspects in that way. One of the things that Phoenix came with was a plane builder. So if you had a custom idea, you can build it simply, and I call it simply, but there's a method that's easy to follow. And if I'm trying to think of, I don't have the one in my head right away, but there's like a Steam game that's like a playing game, and you can build your own planes, and it's similar to that, but it's done and put into the Phoenix modeling simulator. So you can basically test your model before you go and build a custom version of it and hope it flies. So it might help you find out where your CG is if you build it accurately to what you're envisioning in your head. So you can use that as well as there's some guys, they put if you're like me, I grew up watching Robotech and Macross and all that stuff that came from Japan when I was a kid in the 80s. So there's a group, he built like 5 or 6 of these Macross planes from all these movies, and they're beautiful planes. They're just gorgeous. And they're vectored thrust, and they're high inches. They look like F-22s, in that sense. And they're a lot of fun to fly. And so if you go into the custom builds, you can probably find any plane you didn't think you had. And if not, there's at least a plane builder for you to build something that you don't see, which is pretty neat. And that's the hardest part, I think, for me. When I look at Real Flight has a great collection of flight test planes, but it would have been nice while I was learning, years ago on Real Flight, to be able to throw a couple of ideas in there and build them, because I was going to build them in real life, and at least understand where the CG was and see how they flew and see if it was worth even going further. And Real Flight didn't really give me an easy option, whereas Phoenix seems to have that kind of thing built in and available to the user as part of the download. So, and I think the other thing to talk about is if you really are into gliding or slope soaring, there's a game called PikaSim. It's not a game, it's a simulator called PikaSim. And it's primarily for slope soaring. There's a limited number of models, although I think it expands when you give it. I've only tried the free version, but it does a pretty good job that feels very similar to Real Flight on slope soaring, where you have a model and you're literally, one of their games is there's posts on either side of you, and your job is to fly back and forth 20 times between the posts. Because if you can do that, you could probably slope soar anywhere. So it's a great training tool, even though it's supposed to be, it's set up as kind of a game. Like, who can get through the 20 fastest? And you ding, 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 and you keep going back and forth, and it's not easy. 20 times back and forth without crashing for a new guy, especially new to slip soaring, let alone flying. Yeah, that wasn't easy. But I learned a lot. Like, I learned a lot about slope soaring and kind of the angle and what you can get away with and what you're going to, like, what you can't. And at what point does that lift pocket end? Because that's part of it. Like, the air is compressing and it's creating additional speed, and with that, and it's also kind of going upwards, so it's giving lift to the plane by both the speed and the actual direction. But at a certain point over the lip of that slope, you're losing all of the benefits. and now you're kind of stuck gliding down and trying not to crash it with
Right.
no power source. So it's not like you can just recover. So it's pretty neat, and it also gives me a greater appreciation for those people who obviously they're expert slope flyers, and it's just like, wow, look at that. I think that covers everything. I'm looking through our notes just to be sure that the stuff on your phone is usually done with a tilt. So what you're not going to get is you're not going to get any kind of control muscle memory, but it will help you with right to left, and it will help you with orientations. Um, like I said, the one sim helped call out maneuvers. Like the only way you could pass the next board is if you completed one of the maneuvers a couple times. So outward barrel roll, inward barrel roll, a tight roll, a loop, outward loop, Cubanate, hammerhead, that kind of stuff. Start going through. So it was pretty cool. It's pretty useful, and I very much enjoyed playing it. It wasn't the best as far as a simulator, and it was hard to control. Um, but it did have that benefit that I other than Phoenix having the list of tutorials, I really haven't seen from any of the other ones, any other Sims. And I think with that, I think it kind of closes it. Do you have anything to add?
Um, no, I mean I kind of covered what I needed to with Flight Sim. And,
Mm-hmm.
you've info dumped a ton on simulators, so
Yeah, and
thank you for
again,
being
it's
aware of all that.
I suppose. Um, it was. I think it was originally just me trying to find a simulator that would work with my radio link, and what I turned out was the problem was I think the connection's bad in the darn uh, transmitter itself. And at the time, I
Hmm.
wasn't willing to open it up and try to figure it out. Like, no, I'm not opening it up. Um,
Yeah.
right. So, in an effort to find something different, I looked out for these other things. And I was surprised that Phoenix kind of went the way of the dodo. It's a great program, and again, I know there's more. And if you're a listener going shouting out, please, what's this other way? Like, why don't you know this one? Like, shout it out, man. Let us know. Give us an email. Um, we would love to hear what other simulators are there, and I would love to be able to tell our other listeners who are maybe thinking like, I want to be able to get into this quickly and simply, and I'm like for almost nothing. Like I said, there's like an FMS. I couldn't get that to work. RC Desk Pilot. I also couldn't get that to work, and maybe it's because Windows 10 changed a lot about it. Um, Simple Planes can do something, but that's more of a game kind of first person thing that's available on Steam. But the cool part is you can build your own plane, and that's a lot of fun. And that's very similar to the Phoenix Builder. But I found that all of those, like again, RC Desk Pilot, if you do end up getting that working, same with the FMS, um, it's a really, I'll call it a pretty crude version. It's polys that teach you how to fly.
Hmm.
They're going to get you there for the basic orientations and the general feel on stick movements versus translating it to plane movement. But it's the Phoenix and Real Flight seem to be kind of the leaders. And again, at this point, it's pretty much Real Flight. Real Flight 9, I think now. Um, on That's really the go-to one. Again, I'm sorry for all of the makers and developers of other simulators that I haven't seen. Um, and if you aren't there, please get yourself heard. The rest of us would love to have maybe competition to Real Flight.
Well, in working on closing this episode out, Matthew was currently on your workbench.
Workbench. Um, as it has been, maybe I'm afraid of the Viking. I don't know. I have to finish the Viking landing gear, the rear landing gear. I found a full set of landing gear, and so I'm probably going to install the retractable steerable nose gear from that because it'll be simple. Although I really do want to build finish building what I had thought out. I don't know why. Part of it has been a busy week with the beginning of school and all, but
Yeah.
but I've also, I've 3D printed a couple retractables, and I'm excited to kind of install those in planes and see how they hold up. Really, my workbench is probably just landing gear and trying to get my kid, my oldest, to build. He had bought a vector, FT vector, Mighty Mini Vector, I think is what they called it, at Flight Fest last year, and I've been kind of enticing him to try to build one. Otherwise, I think the only other things that are going to be on my build thing are older projects that I'm going to pull out of mothball and see if I can finish. Bird of Time being one, and any number of the fantasy builds. I think I submitted. I think it was like 10 new models. So any of those that didn't finish, I'll probably dust off at least one of those and start getting at it.
Okay.
What about you? What are you going to work on?
I'm not entirely sure just yet. Again, the fuselage for the Simple Soarer is going to have to be rebuilt. Or I know that I could just like glue and tape and reinforce, but
you could
knowing me, I will probably, yeah. But also knowing me, I know I'll probably say I'm going to rebuild that fuselage. But if I don't do that, then I'll probably print out the plans for the Spitfire and go ahead and work on getting that built.
Okay.
Take that one out, give it a try, and if that one fails, then I will return to my trusted old bogey that I know I can fly and have a good time with. Well, all right, we're going to work on getting out of here. Matthew, I want to thank you for doing a lot of the heavy lifting on the research needed for this episode.
That's okay.
And we also want to thank all of you for tuning in and listening. As always, feel free to write in and let us know about projects that you're working on and what you've been flying. And until next time, fly safe.